Hi, I'm Ann Gaviola. Welcome to the Peak on Global, where we break down what is trending in the business world and what you need to know to stay ahead of the curve. Joining me now is Brett Chang from the Peak podcast. Welcome, Brett.
Hey, Ann, great to be with you as always.
Let's start things off with a look at shares of Nvidia. They were given a little boost, or rather a big boost this week on news its sales hit a record after more than doubling. All this based on demand for its AI chips, which is absolutely soaring. Nvidia chief executive Jensen Huang declared that a new computing era has begun. Thoughts, Brett?
Well, what's really interesting about what Nvidia is doing right now is that their chips, their AI-oriented chips, are some of the most in-demand consumer products anywhere in the world, more in demand than the most luxury of handbags or cars. And that's because the power that they possess. As there's this new crop of startups that are building on top of these large language models like OpenAI and Cohere, the demand for these chips is larger than ever. And investors think that there is really this revolutionary new platform on the horizon, but we're still really early on in the development of this technology, and it's hard to see exactly how it's going to impact us.
Yeah, it's nascent, but it also has the ability to potentially develop fairly quickly. To say that there's a lot of excitement about AI would be the understatement of the decade. We heard from Angelo Zeno, who's an equity analyst at CFRA. He called it, quote, the most important company to civilization this decade. I think it's super interesting how much of the nuance around this much hyped technology has disappeared. So people either think it's going to bring on the next tech revolution or the demise of human life as we know it, that we're no longer going to be the apex species. There's very little talk of a scenario in between. And to be fair, it is entirely possible that both of those things can come to fruition, just not at the same time. Brett, how bubbly is AI getting, and how do you feel about this potentially super disruptive, game-changing technology?
I think it's representative of our collective attention span. One day we're very concerned about AI and we think it's going to be the next revolutionary technology, or as you said, it could destroy all of humanity. The next day we're talking about the Trump mugshot or Prigozhin's plane crash. And so we do tend to shift on the news cycle fairly often. One point I think is important is that this is all happening very quickly, as you said. And I think what we'll have to wait for is, what does the next evolution of this technology look like? The trigger moment for all of the hype around it was the release of ChatGPT by OpenAI. And we're looking now at what is coming down the horizon that could similarly inspire or cause fear among users with this technology. And it's hard to see that right now, but you're absolutely right. It is happening very quickly, and we'll have to take a look. But depending on who you talk to, AI could be a huge bubble. It could be undervalued. It could be overvalued. And it's really hard to say right now because the technology is so nascent, like you said.
Okay, hot take. What if all of these things are true? Some segments of the AI industry are overvalued and some are undervalued, and it will be extremely disruptive, and it's also going to change absolutely everything about the way we live our everyday lives. It's like an improv where it's this and not or. Anyway, topic number 2, no easy way to segue into this one. We have a warning from researchers at RBC about millennial debt. So specifically, debt held by millennial and younger Gen X homeowners. There is concern about young workers in particular and how vulnerable they may be to both higher borrowing costs as a result of higher interest rates, as well as their ability to remain gainfully employed as the economy cools. Brett, you're basically our millennial correspondent. What are your thoughts on this perfect storm for the youngs?
It's important to remember that every mortgage that is issued is stress tested. So the banks know that there is a range in which a family or a couple could maintain that mortgage and what that might look like in the event that they don't get a raise or if interest rates go up a certain extent. And so that is tested to a point. The obviously biggest variable there is if they lose employment, like you said. And so absolutely right now, a lot of people in Canada of all generations are holding on to debt. Of course, millennials are holding on to it the most because they're the ones that are entering the housing market at this point in time. Now, they've obviously been hit hard by the interest rates to date. If they've been able to maintain that or if they've been able to re-up, I think that's a good sign. The real test is going to be, like you mentioned, if the economy does cool down and they lose that full-time employment. Then they're going to be in a very difficult position where the banks may start to foreclose on houses. We haven't seen that just yet. I think what you're starting to see now is there are some people who had variable rates who can no longer keep up with those payments. And they're, in most cases, selling their houses and going back to the rental market, which is not an ideal outcome, but is better than foreclosure. At least they have somewhere to go. If the economy does cool, that's when the real test begins.
Yeah, and we're already seeing some signs of, let's call it, fraying in the labor market. I think we need to keep in mind the fact that, typically it takes 18 months to 2 years for rate hikes to be fully felt throughout the economy from when they are announced by the Bank of Canada and enacted. There's a sobering stat from that RBC report. It says the average person in Canada renewing their mortgage early next year could see their payments soar by as much as 25%. And we know that on average incomes, and certainly not for the youngest workers, incomes haven't increased by that much. So any way you slice it, that is financial pain that is in the mail. We've been talking about interest rates climbing, but the impact of those aggressive rate hikes have yet to fully hit household budgets. Are you worried, Brett?
Everything you said is true, Anne, and the problem that I try to wrap my head around is that these are the same types of points that we've heard about the Canadian housing market now for the past 10 years. It wasn't interest rates before, but it was that the economy is going to cool and people won't be able to keep up with their mortgage payments. Now it's interest rates that compound on top of that. At some point you look at it and you think that something has to happen, that there has to be some type of collapse or correction or serious correction in the market, more so than we've seen over the past 5 years. And I think everyone is just kind of waiting for that shoe to drop, but we don't exactly know what it is. Of course, the market to date has been bolstered by large immigration numbers. That could continue to be the case. It still remains supply constrained, and we don't see that changing anytime soon. So I am generally concerned about the housing market, and I think it's bad for the country, the state that it's currently in. However, I don't know exactly, or I can't see specifically when that other shoe is going to drop and we're going to see that major correction.
Yeah, it's a whole, crisis, multifactorial, multifaceted. Our third topic, not related, but once upon a time, LinkedIn was the social media platform that didn't get a ton of love or respect. I've heard, getting mocked for being a haven for impersonal interactions that kind of reflected a kind of weird hustle culture gone sterile. But apparently, LinkedIn is having a moment. There's a big shift in user traffic this year. I personally have always been a fan of LinkedIn, but it has in the last couple of years become a really great way to stay in touch with people I meet at conferences, keep up to date with people getting promotions and new jobs. It's exciting. People share nice stories, and it makes me feel connected to all these different people that we cross paths with in life. It's also one of the most respectful social media sites. Again, speaking from my own personal experience, it is incredible what requiring you to post your employment info and real name can do to tame the trolling. So it's not perfect, not by any means, and I wouldn't even call it cool. Bloomberg apparently says it's now cool. But LinkedIn has been a great source for me in terms of career connections and reaching out to sources. Brett, do you like LinkedIn?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. I think it's one of the most positive places on the internet, which is a nice change from some of the other platforms out there. In addition to that, the Peak, my business, it grew primarily on LinkedIn. And
oh, wow.
I think the big what we noticed was that when you have somebody's real name and that they are posting something that is an endorsement of what they've seen, and people take it very seriously because it's a personal endorsement. And so we saw a greater uptake in traffic and in subscriptions by people when they would post on LinkedIn versus other channels, because LinkedIn just feels like a more serious and honest platform. So it's been important to us at the Peak, and so I'm a big fan of it.
I'm a big fan of the peak content that you guys are posting on LinkedIn. It's also a great source for insight from experts on what's going on with AI. Now, let's talk, though, about the context for all of this, because there's a lot of upheaval in the realm of social media. Twitter is, by some accounts, a burning tire fire under Elon Musk's reactive and bizarre leadership. You have Threads, which started out really strong, but seems to be fizzling out if you go by the number of users. Facebook, many consider it beyond passé. How much of LinkedIn's success is the platform's great execution versus it's just looking way better compared to its faltering rivals?
That's a good question. I'm not sure people even compare LinkedIn to the other platforms because it's so different and almost operates independently of other social media. And I think that's probably its biggest strength, which is it kind of competes in a bit of business judo, where it looks at other platforms that are all competing over the same types of content and users, and it says, we're not going to do any of that. We're going to focus on our niche, what we do best, and that's what we're going to excel at. And I think that's probably what's made them so great, is they've stayed out of the fray entirely from all of the other social media conversations. So I think that's probably what makes LinkedIn so great, and it probably is what will continue to see its growth.
maybe I'm going to do a 180 here and say, yeah, maybe LinkedIn is starting to be cool. I like to be more counterculture, but whatever. Thank you so much for your time and your insight, Brett.
Thanks, Anne.
You can get all your daily business news with the Peak Daily Podcast. It's available for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts.